Okay, let's unpack this. I mean, imagine taking these two huge traditions for looking inside ourselves, right? One is, what, 2,600 years old, based on really deep personal observation, and the other is super new, all fMRI scans and, electrical readings from the brain. What actually happens when you put those two together?
Well, what's really kind of revolutionary when you dig into the sources we've looked at for today, it's this realization. It's not like they're drawing maps of two different countries. They're not. They're mapping the exact same
The
place,
same place, which is,
the human mind, our own minds, and how incredibly malleable they are. So our mission today really is to try and cut through the jargon, from both neuroscience and Buddhism, and give you a really clear science-backed picture of how these ancient practices, these contemplative things, how they actually use neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change itself to, well, to rewire us for more happiness, more wisdom, real lasting stuff.
and the story of how this connection first really clicked. It almost sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? Like worlds colliding in a lab.
It really does. The sources we drew on, they trace it back to this specific moment. Picture a neurology lab. Humming machines, bright screens, graphs everywhere.
Yeah.
And in walks this monk from Kathmandu. Simple robes, totally calm. He's volunteered for a meditation study.
Right, and they hook him up to the brain scanner.
Exactly. And they ask him to just maintain this state of deep stillness, deep meditation, while they're scanning his brain activity.
And the description is just incredible. The scientist is there watching these like colorful brain scans, probably expecting to see signs of, I don't know, mental strain or effort.
Right. But instead, what shows up on the monitor from the monk's intense focus,
Hmm.
it's described as these graceful, really synchronized waves, like watching a calm sea, but where all the waves are perfectly ordered, perfectly in sync.
Wow. Not frantic activity, but organized peace.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And seeing that, seeing inner peace, not just as someone saying, I feel calm, but as something you could actually see on a screen,
Mm.
a verifiable, organized biological state. Well, that planted the seed for this whole area of research, this whole deep dive. It
Yeah.
was like proof almost that the mechanism for transformation wasn't just mystical, it was observable,
Yeah.
biological.
And that realization, that kind of aha moment, it gives us the whole structure for today's exploration. We've pulled out 5 key ideas, the source material calls them compass points, that really guide everything. These aren't just abstract themes, they're like the actual levers you can pull to change your own mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
The first one, and maybe the most hopeful, is neuroplasticity. It's the brain's amazing ability to rewire itself physically, chemically, functionally all through your life. Which basically means, the way your mind is working right now, that's not the final version. You're not stuck.
Okay, that's huge. Point 2.
Point 2 is mindfulness. This is the specific how. It's the workout, the training that actually drives that neuroplastic change. Think of it like doing push-ups for your brain's emotional and attentional circuits. It literally reshapes them over time.
Got it. Like exercise sculpts muscle. Point 3.
3 is emotions. Really understanding them, not just as these random feelings that wash over us, but as, well, biological events, events that often get tangled up with the stories we tell ourselves about them.
Hmm.
And the key is learning how to untangle the raw feeling from the narrative, the suffering part.
Okay.
4 is compassion. And this isn't just some soft, fuzzy idea. The science is showing it's a trainable skill, a cognitive skill.
Mhm.
And training it demonstrably benefits your brain-activating reward centers, lowering stress hormones, just as much as it benefits the person you're feeling compassion for.
Interesting. It's good for the giver, too. And number 5.
And finally, 5, purpose and meaning. These might sound abstract, but they have real, measurable effects in the brain. Having a sense of purpose actually organizes brain activity. You can see its fingerprints, so to speak, in the neural areas linked to motivation, drive, and that feeling of real fulfillment.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a roadmap. It shows just how deep this synthesis goes. Let's start right back at that initial meeting point you mentioned, how these two very different ways of mapping the mind started looking at the same thing.
Right. So chapter 1 in our source material really digs into this convergence. You have Buddhism starting 2,600 years ago, and really began as this incredibly empirical investigation, like data-driven, but the data was inner experience. The Buddha was trying to figure out, why do we suffer? What's the mechanism? And that led to the Abhiharma, which is this amazingly detailed map of consciousness, breaking down moments into intention, feeling tone, perception, what drives us. It was the first deep dive into the mind, purely from the inside.
Looking inward, meticulously observing the flow of experience.
Exactly. And then, fast forward centuries, and you have neuroscience, using tools like fMRI, EEG, high-powered microscopes.
Looking from the outside in.
Precisely. Mapping the same territory, but with external instruments. The analogy used in the sources is really good. It's like the Buddha watched thoughts and feelings come and go like clouds in the sky, studying the weather of consciousness, while the neuroscientist tracks the electrical storms and currents, the neural tissue generating that weather.
Both looking at the same weather system, just from different vantage points.
And what's truly stunning is how well the maps align. You take something from the ancient Buddhist texts, like dosa, which is aversion, ill will, that instant push-away reaction to unpleasantness.
That feeling of get it away from me.
Yeah, and neuroscientifically, where does that light up? It aligns almost perfectly with the activity in the limbic system, especially the amygdala, the brain's threat detector, the fear hub.
So the ancient insight predicted the modern neuroanatomy?
In a way, yes, or at least described the functional outcome that neuroscience later located. And look at the flip side. The parts of the brain responsible for higher-level stuff, planning, controlling impulses, thinking about our own thinking, that's largely the prefrontal cortex.
Our inner CEO, kind of.
Right. And that function lines up beautifully with core Buddhist concepts like samasati, right, mindfulness, which is about balanced, sustained attention, and samadhi, right, concentration. And here's the kicker. The data actually shows that people who practice contemplative techniques long-term, they develop physically thicker cortical layers right there in those prefrontal areas.
Wow. So the practice physically builds up the brain regions associated with the skills being practiced. It's not just metaphorical.
Not at all. It's biological validation. Which brings us right back to that first massive compass point, neuroplasticity. You know, for a long time, the scientific dogma was that the adult brain was pretty much fixed. Wired in childhood, maybe some pruning, but then it just declined. The sources describe this old view as thinking the brain was like machine steel, hard, set, unchangeable.
But that view got completely overturned, didn't it?
Completely. Thanks to better imaging and studying people recovering from strokes or older adults learning new skills, science discovered this radical truth. The brain isn't a finished machine. It's dynamic. It's alive. The source material calls it living clay, constantly being molded by our experiences, our thoughts, our actions.
Living clay. I like that. It implies we have a hand in the shaping.
Exactly. And this biological fact is what makes transformation even possible. Think about it. When the Buddha taught something like, whatever you frequently think about and ponder, that will become the inclination of your mind. He was describing from the inside what neuroscientists now call the Hebbian mechanism. Neurons that fire together wire together. If you keep thinking anxious thoughts, you strengthen anxiety circuits. If you deliberately cultivate calm, you strengthen calm circuits. It's cause and effect at the neural level.
Okay, let's make this concrete. There's that famous study about London taxi drivers. Tell us about that.
Ah, yes, the Eleanor Maguire study from 2000. It's a classic. So London cabbies, to get their license, have to memorize the knowledge. It's this incredibly complex mental map of something like 25,000 streets, landmarks, routes. It's a massive feat of spatial memory.
Right, notoriously difficult.
Extremely. So Maguire scanned their brains using MRI, and what did she find? Their posterior hippocampus, a brain region known to be crucial for spatial memory and navigation, was significantly larger, physically bigger, than in control subjects who didn't drive taxis.
Bigger? Like the structure actually grew?
Volumetrically larger, yes. And here's the really crucial part the sources emphasize. It was dosage dependent. The longer someone had been driving a cab, the bigger that specific part of their hippocampus was.
Wow, so it wasn't just that people with bigger hippocampi became cabbies. The job itself changed their brains.
Precisely. It was the sustained mental effort, the constant navigation practice that physically molded the brain structure. It completely demolishes the idea that our brains are fixed after childhood.
That's incredible. Structure changing based on pure mental activity. And this happens down at the micro level too, right? It's not just big structures.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The sources dive into this. At the cellular level, change is constant. Like the receptors on your amygdala cells, the docking stations for fear signals, they actually get recycled every few hours. And even more dramatically, those little connections between neurons, the synapses, specifically the dendritic spines where connections happen. Research shows these can literally appear or disappear over the course of a single intensive mindfulness retreat, like in days.
Yes. That's mind-bogglingly fast. The brain's hardware is that responsive.
The sustained, focused attention and intention.
Yeah.
Yes, it seems so.
Okay, so if intention is the sculptor, how does that work? How does just wanting to change or focusing actually push the clay around?
Well, intention, or satana, in Buddhist terms, seems to act like the initial electrical spark directed through specific circuits, especially those involving the prefrontal cortex. The sources use a great, really simple example, deciding not to immediately check your phone when you wake up.
Ah, the morning scroll urge. I know it well.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
Your brain's default pathway, the habit, wants that quick hit of novelty, that dopamine rush. It's a well-worn path. But when you intentionally pause, even for just a minute, maybe you choose to feel your breath instead, or just notice the urge without acting. In that moment of conscious choice, you're sending the electrical energy down a different, maybe fainter alternative pathway, the pathway of mindful choice.
And the old pathway.
It doesn't get the juice. It's deprived of that electrical current. And over time, if you keep making that choice, the new pathway gets stronger, grows more connections, while the old reflexive pathway, through neglect, starts to weaken, to wither.
So that tiny pause, that seemingly small act of willpower, it's actually a neurobiological intervention. You're redirecting the brain's energy flow.
You are. And that redirection, repeated enough times, eventually changes the underlying structure, changes gene expression that supports synapse growth in the new direction. Every single time you consciously choose presence over reactivity, you're laying down a tiny physical trace of freedom in your brain.
That is incredibly empowering. It makes change feel possible, tangible. But it leads to the big question, doesn't it? If our brains are so plastic, so ready to learn and adapt, why do we suffer so much? Why do we keep falling into the same old painful ruts?
Exactly. Why isn't wisdom the default? That takes us right into the brain's architecture of pain and, crucially, how we amplify it.
Okay, Chapter 3 tackles this head-on. If we can change, why is suffering such a constant companion? The answer seems to be rooted in our evolutionary history, right?
Yep.
Our brains weren't built for happiness, primarily.
That's the core message. They were built for survival. And that ancient survival system, while effective back on the savannah, is kind of glitchy in modern life. It generates a lot of false alarms. Suffering often starts in the limbic system, particularly that lightning-fast amygdala. We mentioned it before. It detects potential threats and reacts in less than half a second.
Less than half a second.
Yeah, something like 200 milliseconds before our prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking part, even fully gets the message and can assess the situation properly. So in those first crucial milliseconds, your body's already getting flowed with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. The feeling of danger, emergency, is already broadcasting internally.
And that quick trigger made sense back when a rustle in the grass could actually be a predator. Better safe than sorry.
Exactly. Overreacting and surviving was a better bet than underreacting and becoming lunch. The brain evolved with this built-in negativity bias. It's constantly scanning for threats, and it errs on the side of caution.
Survival first, serenity later. Or maybe never.
Well, that's the evolutionary bargain we inherited. And this tendency maps incredibly well into the traditional Buddhist 3 poisons that are said to drive suffering. There's craving, that endless dopamine-driven chase for pleasure or relief. There's aversion, the limbic system's threat network firing up, pushing away anything unpleasant. And delusion, the fundamental misunderstanding that chasing desires and avoiding discomfort is the path to lasting peace. These 3 keep us trapped in cycles of dukkha, or dissatisfaction.
So we're kind of hardwired for that initial jolt of unpleasantness, the first arrow, as the sources call it. We can't really avoid pain, loss, stress.
No, that's just part of life. The first arrow is the unavoidable event, the critical email, the sudden loss, the physical pain. It happens. But the real suffering, the second arrow, that's the one we shoot ourselves with.
The second arrow, explain that.
The second arrow is our reaction to the first. It's the resistance, this shouldn't be happening. The rumination, why me? What did I do wrong? The self-judgment, I'm such an idiot for feeling this way. The catastrophizing, this is the end of the world. It's the whole storyline we layer on top of the raw physical or emotional sensation. And that layer is what keeps the suffering going, long after the initial event. It keeps re-triggering the limbic system, keeping the stress hormones flowing for hours, days, even years.
Whereas the initial emotion itself, the actual biological event, is much shorter.
Much shorter. Neuroscientists like Jill Boltainer talk about the actual chemical rush of an emotion lasting maybe 90 seconds in the body.
Yeah.
After that, if we're still feeling it intensely, it's because we're choosing to re-stimulate the circuit with our thoughts.
Wow, 90 seconds, that's manageable. So the suffering comes from feeding the fire, not the initial spark.
Exactly. And that's the leverage point. We might not be able to stop the first arrow, but we have a choice about the second.
Is there anything we can do about that initial 200 millisecond lag? Can we train ourselves to react faster with the thinking brain?
Shrinking that specific lag time structurally is really hard, maybe impossible. But what you can train is the interception. How quickly you notice what's happening and choose a different response. And the simplest, most powerful tool for this, neurobiologically speaking, is labeling the emotion, the name it to tame it strategy.
Name it to tame it. How does that work in the brain?
When you consciously recognize a strong, maybe overwhelming feeling, and you mentally put a simple word to it like, this is anxiety, or, okay, anger is here, you activate a specific part of your prefrontal cortex, the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, or VLPFC.
Okay, and what does activating the VLPFC do?
It acts like a neural brake. It brings language and conceptual understanding to bear on that raw, chaotic storm of feeling coming from the amygdala. It shifts the processing. Instead of just being swept away by the feeling, I am furious, you move to observing it. I notice the feeling of fury arising. That simple shift dampens the amygdala's reactivity.
So you move from being the emotion to witnessing the emotion.
Precisely. And contrast that with what we usually do, ruminate.
Sure.
We just keep replaying the story, the injustice, the fear. That rumination strengthens the connection between the default mode network, DMN, our inner storyteller, often self-critical, and the limbic system. It keeps the second arrow flying, digging the suffering deeper.
The sources mention a personal story here about getting a harsh review.
Yeah, the author talks about getting some really tough academic feedback early on. The initial sting of disappointment that was the first arrow, unavoidable. But then came the second arrows, thick and fast. I'm a total failure. I'll never make it. What was I thinking? Cue the racing heart, the knot in the stomach, the full body anxiety response.
The downward spiral.
Totally. And it wasn't until later during a meditation session that they were able to just sit with the raw, burning physical sensation without letting the negative story attach itself, just observing the feeling. And that's when the cycle started to break.
Because that constant self-critique, that rumination, is actually carving deeper pathways in the brain.
Exactly. It's creating what Buddhism calls samskara, these deeply ingrained mental habits or formations. They become automatic responses. Mindful awareness, sati, is the tool we use to shine a light on that process. It strengthens other brain areas, like the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain's conflict monitor, allowing us to notice the urge to ruminate and consciously choose to pause instead.
Okay, so we can learn to manage the aversion, the pushing away. But what about the other side of the coin, the constant pulling towards, the craving? Let's shift to chapter 4, about the happiness circuit. We often misuse dopamine, don't we?
Hugely misused. We tend to think dopamine is pleasure, the feeling of enjoyment itself. But the neuroscience is much more nuanced. Dopamine is primarily about motivation, about anticipation. It's the neurochemical that says, go get that, this will be good. It's the engine of wanting, not the feeling of liking or satisfaction.
Wanting, not liking, that's a key difference.
It's crucial because it explains Tana, the Buddhist concept of thirst or craving, perfectly. It also explains why we get stuck on the hedonic treadmill.
Ah, yes, the hedonic treadmill. Explain that a bit.
It's the phenomenon where we chase something, a raise, a new gadget, a relationship thinking that will finally make us happy. We get it, there's a brief dopamine spike, a feeling of pleasure, but very quickly, the brain adapts. That new level becomes the new normal. The pleasure fades, the baseline resets higher, and the dopamine system starts screaming for the next thing, the next upgrade, to get that feeling again.
So you're always chasing a high that keeps moving further away.
Pretty much. It's like using a dopamine credit card. The thrill is temporary, but you're left with the debt of dissatisfaction, always needing more. The reward centers, like the nucleus accumbens, just recalibrate.
So if chasing dopamine highs isn't the answer to lasting happiness, what is? The sources talk about mindful savoring.
Yes, exactly. The solution isn't to deny pleasure or avoid good experiences. It's about changing our relationship to them. Mindful savoring is about paying full, appreciative attention to a pleasant experience, a good meal, a moment of connection, the warmth of the sun without desperately clinging to it or wishing it would last forever.
So enjoying it fully, but holding it lightly.
Beautifully put. And this practice actually builds new connections. It strengthens the pathways between the prefrontal cortex, thinking, reflecting, and the limbic structures, feeling, reward. You train yourself to feel pleasant things more vividly, to really register them, but with less attachment, less dependence on them for your overall well-being.
Okay, so if dopamine is the short-lived buzz, what about the neurochemicals for more stable background happiness? The sources mention serotonin and oxytocin.
Right. Think of serotonin as providing the general background hum of contentment, of feeling okay. It's more about a steady state of well-being, less about the peaks and valleys of dopamine hits. And oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone or love drug, comes into play with social connection, trust, and warmth.
And crucially, we can influence these.
Yes, especially oxytocin. Practices like compassion cultivation or meta-meditation, where you intentionally cultivate feelings of warmth and goodwill toward yourself and others, these have been shown to trigger oxytocin release. They also activate brain regions involved in empathy and positive emotion, like the anterior cingulate cortex again. It shifts our social interactions from potentially threatening to potentially rewarding and calming. It builds that tend-and-befriend response biologically.
So generating kindness actually changes our brain chemistry towards connection.
It does, and there's a very specific practical technique mentioned from neuropsychologist Rick Hansen for deliberately strengthening these positive states. Taking in the good.
Taking in the good, how does that work?
It's simple but powerful. You deliberately focus your attention on any positive experience, however small a nice comment someone made, the taste of your coffee, a feeling of accomplishment, and you intentionally hold your attention on the pleasant feeling associated with it for at least 20 seconds, maybe longer.
Why 20 seconds? That seems specific.
It is. That duration seems to be the minimum needed to ensure the experience moves from short-term memory into long-term storage. It facilitates neural consolidation. You need that sustained firing for long-term potentiation, the process that strengthens synapses. You're essentially marinating your neurons in that wholesome feeling, actively directing the brain's learning machinery to build pathways for positivity, calm, and resilience.
So you're consciously counteracting negativity bias by amplifying and encoding the good stuff.
Exactly. You're modifying those samskaras, those mental habits, by deliberately practicing the positive alternative. True happiness, in this view, isn't just luck. It's a skill built through consistent, intentional practice. Okay, so if neuroplasticity is the potential and happiness circuits can be strengthened, what's the core tool that makes it all happen? Chapter 5 really hammers this home.
Yeah.
It's attention. And the challenge is our attention in the modern world is, well, it's under constant assault, isn't it?
Totally. Notifications, emails, infinite scrolling. It feels like our focus is constantly being pulled in a million directions.
It is. And internally, the main culprit for that scattered feeling is often the default mode network, the DMN.
Right, the DMN, that's the brain's idle network, the mind-wandering network.
Exactly. It's what kicks in when you're not actively focused on a specific external task. It does useful things like planning and reflecting, but it's also responsible for that monkey mind chatter, rehashing the past, worrying about the future, ruminating on yourself. Neuroscientists estimate that mind wandering, largely driven by the DMN, takes up something like half of our waking hours.
Half. That's a lot of time spent not being present.
A huge amount. And our technology is almost perfectly designed to hijack it, constantly feeding the DMN little snippets of distraction. So to understand how mindfulness acts as a countermeasure, it helps to know a bit about the brain's attention systems. Neuroscience identifies 3 main networks.
Okay, break those down for us. What are the 3 attention networks?
So first, there's the alerting network. This is about achieving and maintaining alertness, basic readiness. Think of it as the brain's power switch for paying attention. Second is the orienting network. This is like the spotlight. It selects which sensory information gets priority. When you decide to focus on your breath, you're engaging the orienting network. And third, and really critical for training, is the executive network. This involves key players like the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLPFC.
The ACC and DLPFC, what do they do?
The ACC acts like a conflict monitor. It notices when your intention, through you stay focused on the breath, clashes with something else, e.g. a distracting thought, an urge to check your phone. And the DLPFC is like the manager that steps in to resolve that conflict, redirecting attention back to the intended target. It's the muscle of focus control.
Okay, so when people talk about multitasking, what's happening with these networks?
Well, true multitasking is basically a myth, neurologically speaking. What we're actually doing is forcing the orienting network to switch back and forth very rapidly between different tasks. Each switch takes time and mental energy. It burns through cognitive resources, increases errors, and fractures focus. It's incredibly inefficient. Mindfulness practice is essentially training to stabilize the orienting network on one thing, reducing the need for the executive network, ACCDL-PFC, to constantly jump in and resolve conflicts. You build attentional stamina.
And this training actually changes the brain's electrical patterns. We hear about brain waves, alpha, gamma. How do they fit in?
They're like the rhythms of brain communication. 2 key ones in attention are alpha and gamma. Alpha waves, which are a bit slower, act kind of like a gatekeeper, When you're focused, alpha activity increases in brain areas you don't need, effectively inhibiting distractions. It clears the mental space.
Okay, so alpha quiets the noise. What about gamma?
Gamma waves are the fastest frequency, really high frequency oscillations.
Right.
They seem to be involved in binding information together across different brain regions. When you experience moments of intense focus, insight, or clarity, that aha moment, it's often associated with a surge of synchronized gamma waves across the brain. It's like the brain symphony playing in perfect harmony. And remarkably, studies on very experienced long-term meditators like Tibetan monks show they can generate incredibly powerful and sustained gamma synchrony, far beyond what's typical. It suggests a highly unified state of consciousness.
A unified mind, literally reflected in unified brainwaves. And Chapter 6 talks about the physical brain structures changing too. You mentioned the Harvard research earlier.
Yes, the structural changes are quite compelling. Consistent practice leads to increased cortical thickness, thicker gray matter in areas like the insula, which is vital for interoception, sensing your internal body state, and emotional awareness. And also, as we said, in those prefrontal regions, crucial for executive control and attention regulation. At the same time, studies consistently show a decrease in the size or density of the amygdala, that fear center.
So, less reactive fear circuitry, more reflective awareness circuitry. Meditation is literally reshaping the brain's priorities.
That's a great way to put it, redirecting neurological real estate. The source material gives this great example of Elena, a lawyer with a super stressful job.
Right, the corporate lawyer.
Yeah. She started with just 10 minutes of simple breath awareness meditation before her chaotic commute. Initially, she was, a bundle of stress running on cortisol and caffeine. But after just a few weeks of consistent practice, she started noticing changes. She'd catch herself before reacting angrily in traffic, or she'd feel less overwhelmed by her workload. That micropause, that moment of choice got easier. And follow-up scans actually showed changes in her brain activity, less baseline chatter in the DMN, and increased connectivity involving the ACC, that conflict monitor. Her subjective experience was mirrored in her neural function. She was becoming measurably less reactive.
That's a powerful illustration of how even small amounts of practice can start the rewiring process. Okay, let's tackle the really stubborn stuff, habits. Chapter 9 digs into the habit loop, those automatic patterns that seem to run our lives sometimes.
Ah yes, the habit loop. It's a core concept in behavioral psychology and neuroscience. It's usually described as a 3- or 4-part cycle. You have a trigger or cue, could be a time of day, location, an emotion, another person. That trigger leads to a kravet, craving the anticipation of the reward, often driven by a dopamine spike, predicting pleasure or relief. The craving drives the behavior, the routine action, whether it's reaching for a cigarette, checking social media, snapping at someone. And that behavior delivers the reward, the temporary satisfaction, stress reduction, or distraction that reinforces the whole loop for next time.
Trigger, craving, behavior, reward. And this relates back to Sankara.
Exactly. In Buddhist psychology, Sankara refers to these deep-seated mental formations or habitual tendencies. The habit loop is essentially the neurobiological mechanism of Sankara. It's how these patterns get etched into our nervous system and become automatic.
So given how automatic these loops are, how can mindfulness possibly intervene? It feels like they fire off before we even notice.
That's the key. Mindfulness helps you notice. It brings awareness to the previously unconscious parts of the loop. The crucial intervention point is usually between the trigger and the behavior, right when the craving arises. By practicing mindful awareness, you get better at catching that urge, not as an irresistible command, but as a raw, physical sensation in the body. Maybe a tightness, a restlessness, an emptiness. Just noticing it without immediately acting on it creates a space. It separates the trigger from the automatic response. That space is where choice becomes possible again.
So you see the urge, feel it, but don't have to obey it. The sources mentioned Donnie, the designer, scrolling her phone.
Right. Donnie had this ingrained habit of mindless phone scrolling whenever she felt stressed or bored. The trigger was the feeling. The reward was the distraction. She didn't try to fight the urge head-on with willpower, which often fails. Instead, she practiced just noticing the urge arise. She'd pause, feel the restlessness, label it, I urge to scroll, take a few breaths, and often the urge would just crust and pass like a wave. She wasn't feeding the loop.
And that brings us back to the power of naming it, doesn't it? Labeling to liberate, from Chapter 8.
It's such a fundamental tool. We touched on it for emotions, but it works for urges, too. When you put a simple, non-judgmental label on the inner experience, craving, restlessness, sadness, planning, you engage that verbal, analytical part of the brain, the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. This does two things. It helps you disidentify from the feeling. You have the urge, you are not the urge. And it simultaneously dampens the activity in the more primitive reactive parts of the brain, like the amygdala or the habit centers in the basal ganglia. You're shifting gears neurologically from automatic pilot to conscious awareness.
Okay, so we have tools for attention, for managing emotions, for breaking habits. How does all this come together when life throws us major curveballs? Chapter 11 is about resilience and equanimity.
Right, because life will throw curveballs. Stress is inevitable. The question is how we weather it. Biologically, major stress activates the HPA axis, that's the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. It's the body's main stress response system, responsible for releasing cortisol.
Cortisol, the stress hormone, we hear a lot about that.
Yeah, and chronic prolonged exposure to high cortisol levels can be pretty damaging. It can actually shrink the hippocampus, impairing memory, and it can sensitize the amygdala, making us more prone to anxiety and fear. Mindfulness and related contemplative practices have been shown pretty consistently to help regulate the HPA axis, leading to a less reactive, more balanced cortisol response.
So meditation helps calm the biological stress system, and the psychological outcome of that is equanimity.
Upika.
Upekkha, yes. And it's so often misunderstood in the West. People think it means indifference, apathy, not caring. That's not it at all. Equanimity is more like deep balance, inner stability, the ability to experience life's ups and downs, the pleasant, the unpleasant, the neutral, without getting completely thrown off course by them. The sources use that beautiful image, being like a solid mountain, unshaken by the winds of praise and blame, gain and loss, pleasure and pain. You still feel the wind, but you're not blown over. So resilience isn't about building thicker walls to keep stress out. It's about becoming more flexible, more balanced internally.
Exactly. It's not about being tough or numb. It's about cultivating the capacity to meet difficulty with awareness and presence rather than automatic reactivity. And crucially, resilience is trained. Every single time you face a challenge, a difficult conversation, a setback at work, a health scare, and you manage to respond with even a little bit of mindful awareness instead of your usual knee-jerk reaction, you are literally firing and wiring those resilience pathways, strengthening the ACC's ability to monitor conflict, enhancing the prefrontal cortex's ability to regulate emotion. That's why researchers often find greater ACC thickness in people who demonstrate high resilience.
The brain adapts to the way we respond to stress.
It does. There's that great metaphor used in the source material,
Yeah.
sturdy oak versus the flexible bamboo.
Right. The oak stands rigid in a storm and eventually snaps.
Whereas the bamboo bends almost to the ground sometimes, but then springs back up when the wind passes. Resilience is that bamboo-like quality, the capacity to bend without breaking, to adapt and recover. The author shared a personal story about being caught in a sudden, dangerous flash flood. Instead of freezing in panic, which might have been the old default, years of practice allowed a sense of calm observation to emerge. An inner voice started narrating breathing cues, assessing options rationally, enabling effective action. That's trained resilience in action.
Wow. From managing daily habits to navigating life-threatening situations, the training pays off. And this inner stability, this resilience, it doesn't just stay inside, does it? It seems to be the foundation for connecting better with others.
Absolutely. That inner balance is almost a prerequisite for healthy, compassionate connection, which takes us into the fascinating territory of the social brain and the highest states of human potential.
Okay, so once we cultivate some inner calm and resilience, the sources suggest this naturally radiates outward. Chapter 12 explores the social brain. It's amazing how much of our brain power is dedicated to dealing with other people.
It's huge. A vast amount of our neocortex is wired for social cognition, figuring out what others are thinking and feeling, reading facial expressions, predicting intentions, navigating complex relationships. We're fundamentally social creatures. A key part of the mechanism for this is mirror neurons.
Ah, mirror neurons, the empathy neurons.
Sort of. They fire both when we perform an action and when we see someone else perform the same action. Or, more broadly, when we witness someone else's emotional state. If you see someone stub their toe and wince, your mirror neurons related to pain might fire weakly, giving you a little taste of their experience. It's the basis of feeling with someone, of empathy. But the sources make a really critical distinction here, especially for people in caring professions or just trying to navigate difficult relationships.
Which is the difference between empathy that helps and empathy that harms.
Exactly. The difference between compassionate empathy and empathic distress. Empathic distress is when you feel someone else's pain so intensely that you become overwhelmed yourself. You absorb their suffering, get distressed, and might even withdraw because it's too painful. Think burnout. Compassionate empathy, on the other hand, involves feeling for the person, understanding their pain, but maintaining an inner balance. It includes a warm, positive motivation to help, to alleviate their suffering if possible. It's fueled by care, not just by mirroring pain, and it involves different brain circuits activating reward and affiliation areas alongside empathy networks.
So compassion keeps you connected and motivated to help, whereas just raw empathy can lead to shutdown.
Precisely. And guess what helps build compassionate empathy? Practices like loving-kindness meditation. They strengthen the circuits for warmth and care, helping to buffer against empathic distress. This also ties into the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve, that runs all through the body, right? Connecting the brain to the organs.
Yes, it's a major nerve highway, central to the parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and digest system. It's also key to what Stephen Porges calls the social engagement system. High vagal tone, a measure of vagus nerve activity, is linked to better emotional regulation, lower stress, better physical health, and greater social connection. And practices like slow, rhythmic breathing, chanting, and especially loving-kindness meditation have been shown to increase vagal tone.
So practicing compassion literally tones up our body's system for calm and connection.
It seems so. You become physiologically better equipped for safe and positive social interaction. And incredibly high vagal tone can even be felt by others. There was one study mentioned where two people sat back to back. When one started silently practicing loving kindness, the other person's heart rate variability, a measure related to vagal tone, actually started to synchronize, even though they didn't know what the first person was doing.
Wow, we're literally broadcasting our inner state.
To some extent, yes. We co-regulate each other's nervous systems. Calmness and compassion can be contagious, biologically.
That outward focus, that connection, then seems to feed back into our inner sense of meaning, right? Chapter 13 talks about purpose, meaning, and fulfillment. How does finding purpose change the brain?
It seems to require a kind of whole brain alignment. You need the DMN to weave together a coherent story about your life and values. You need the salience network to identify what truly matters to you, what feels important. And you need the reward circuitry, dopamine, oxytocin, to provide the motivation to pursue goals aligned with those values. When these networks are working together, when your actions feel aligned with a deeper purpose, that's when people report feeling genuine fulfillment, not just fleeting pleasure. If they're out of sync, say, you're chasing a goal purely for external validation, even though it doesn't feel meaningful, the brain registers that dissonance. It can lead to stress, burnout, and that feeling of, is this all there is?
Which brings us back to the difference between chasing dopamine hits, Tana, and pursuing something genuinely meaningful, Chanda.
Exactly. Tana is that craving, often leading to the arrival fallacy. You think reaching the goal will fix everything, but it doesn't, because the dopamine fades and the underlying lack of meaning remains. Chanda, wholesome aspiration or intention, is different. It's motivation tied to your core values, to contributing something larger than yourself. The reward here is often more sustained, less about the spike and more about the ongoing feeling of alignment and efficacy.
And the sources say that being altruistic, contributing to others, actually feels good neurologically.
It really does. It's fascinating. Studies using fMRI show that acts of generosity, like donating money to charity, or even just vividly imagining helping someone, activate the same core reward circuits in the brain, like the ventral striatum, that light up when we receive rewards like money or food.
So it is better to give than to receive has a biological basis.
It certainly seems that way. Helping others, contributing to a cause, feeling connected to a larger community. These things reliably activate our brain's reward and affiliation pathways. Our sense of well-being often grows in proportion to how much we feel we're contributing positively to the world around us. The example given is Maria, an accountant who felt unfulfilled. When she started using her skills pro bono for community projects she believed in, her whole sense of purpose and daily satisfaction transformed. Her DMN, salience, and reward networks finally clicked into harmony around something meaningful.
That's a powerful link between inner values and brain function, which leads us finally to the very edge of this research, Chapter 14, the spiritual brain. What happens neurologically during those profound experiences of oneness or transcendence?
This is where things get really intriguing. Consistently, studies looking at deep meditative states, mystical experiences, or even the effects of psychedelics under controlled conditions find a significant pattern. A dramatic decrease in the activity of the default mode network, DMN.
The DMN again. So the network responsible for self-referential thought, for the sense of a separate me, quiets down.
Exactly. When the DMN goes offline, or its activity drastically reduces, That constant narration of me, myself, and I, the storyline that separates us from the world, seems to dissolve. This correlates remarkably well with subjective reports of boundarylessness, ego dissolution, and feelings of unity or oneness with everything experiences described across contemplative traditions for millennia. It aligns beautifully with the Buddhist concept of anatta, or no self.
And electrically, what's happening during these states? You mentioned the gamma symphony earlier.
Right, alongside the DMN quieting down, researchers have observed these powerful, highly synchronized gamma waves, especially in very experienced practitioners like those Tibetan lamas. This high-frequency coherence across large areas of the brain suggests that different neural regions are firing together in perfect time, binding consciousness into a highly unified, integrated state. It might be the neural signature of that subjective feeling of clarity, unity, and profound presence.
It sounds incredible, but the sources also caution against just chasing these peak experiences, right?
Very much so. There's the danger of what's called spiritual bypass, using extraordinary experiences to avoid dealing with ordinary life challenges or integrating the insights. The real goal, emphasized throughout the material, isn't just to have occasional fleeting moments of transcendence. It's about integration, bringing the clarity, the compassion, the reduced ego clinging back into daily life. It's about shifting the baseline, moving from seeking occasional peak states to cultivating a more stable, enduring plateau of presence. That's where the real transformation lies, making wisdom and compassion the default mode, not the exception. #Chad conclusion.
What an incredible journey. We've gone from individual neurons firing together all the way to these profound states of oneness and seen how it's all connected, all underpinned by the brain's capacity to change. So for you listening, bringing this all back down to earth, what are the key things to take away and maybe even try out in your own life?
Well, first and foremost, maybe the most liberating insight. Your brain is plastic. It's constantly changing. You are, in a very real sense, the sculptor of your own mind. Every moment of conscious choice matters. You're never truly stuck with the mind you have right now.
Okay, that's number one. Hope. What's two?
2, understand emotions. Remember that intense feeling like anger. Its raw chemical lifespan in the body is maybe 90 seconds. Anything beyond that is likely the second arrow, the story you're adding. Practice. Name it to tame it. Labeling recruits your thinking brain and calms the storm.
Got it. Tame the second arrow. Third takeaway.
Attention is your superpower. It's trainable. In a world designed to distract you, reclaiming your focus is key. Even just 5 or 10 minutes of mindfulness practice a day starts to quiet the DMN chatter and increase that gamma synchrony, that mental clarity. It makes a real difference.
Attention is trainable. Okay. 4.
4, compassion isn't just nice, it's neurobiologically smart. Training compassion lowers your stress hormones, boosts your immune system via vagal tone, and activates your brain's reward centers in a sustainable way. It's good for you and the world.
It's a skill, not just a feeling. And the final one.
And finally, number 5, integration is where the magic happens. You don't need to retreat to a monastery. The goal is to, as the source material puts it, monasticize the conditions you already live in. Use the traffic jam, the difficult meeting, the family dinner as your practice ground. Those small moments, taking 3 conscious breaths before reacting, spending 20 seconds savoring a small joy, pausing mindfully before checking your phone. That's where the cumulative rewiring occurs.
That's such a key point. It's not about waiting for perfect conditions. It's about working with the life you have right now. What really strikes me from all this is that the path to these states we might call wisdom or even transcendence. It isn't some mystical zap from the blue. It's built, brick by brick, through these small, consistent, intentional micro changes in how we use our attention and respond to our experience, moving from those occasional peaks to that stable plateau of presence. That feels like the real biological signature of a wisely lived life. Something to think about as you make your next decision today.
And maybe that leads to the final question for you, the listener. If the science is showing that even brief, consistent practice yields measurable change, if transformation isn't just for the lucky few or the monks on mountaintops, what small, maybe even 5-minute experiment could you run in the laboratory of your own life, starting today, to begin actively wiring your own brain for greater calm, clarity, and connection?
To get more details about Brainwaves of Buddha, awakening your mind to happiness and wisdom, click the below link to get the book. Subscribe us to get more content like this.